Hey everybody, Edo here, and I am really excited, extra excited today because I have Gavan Brown on the line. Say hello, Gavin.
Hi. Hi,
Hi.
everybody.
He's like, I'm not
Hi,
going to
Ed.
say hello, I'll say hi. And I'm excited because Gavin is director of Roxley, and in particular, like, just one of the best developers, publishers on Kickstarter, period. As far as I'm concerned, you're like royalty. So I'm excited.
Well,
And
thank you. I don't know if I deserve that, but
well,
thank you. There's lots of people that obviously we look up to, so
well,
but that's very kind of you. Thank you.
hopefully not too much. But anyway, so excited to have you and all sorts of questions and just things to discuss. But one of the things I like to start with, because not everyone knows what your personal story is, you know, how did you get into games and Roxley and like how did it sort of come to be?
I probably well, I got it. I used to a long time ago. I've always wanted to be a game designer, but I used to want to design video games. So, for years and years, I worked on a lot of design documents for video games.
Aren't they the best?
And I think in 2006, I was over at a friend's house, and we had dinner and stuff, and then he said, "Hey, do you want to play this game?" And he has Carcassonne in his hand, and I was like, I was such a snob, a video game snob. I was like, "There's no way this thing could be good." So I said, "Hey, is it good?" And he said, "No, it's not. That's why we play it." And so then I was like, okay, I'm gonna play it just so that I can turn down my nose at it, kind of thing, or turn up my nose at it. And so I played it, and for me, it was such a revolutionary experience that after the game, I just stared at this town that we created together, constructively, and I was in utter awe that you could do this kind of stuff, with pieces of cardboard and little pieces of wood. It felt like magic to me. So at that moment, I kind of knew, like, I want to do this for the rest of my life, like, no question about it. And then I worked on a soccer game for years by myself because it was a lonely time back in like 2006, for game designers. There's no Facebook groups
Sure, sure.
and no Kickstarter community and stuff like that. So to design games and just to find other people to play test your game was like finding your friends and family, I guess. So I worked on a soccer game, and people that didn't really understand board games, modern board games, were testing it. And so it did not. It took like 3 years to get it to a place where it was like not even good. Like it worked, but it was sucked basically. And then there was these this email that was going around, Alberta for let's have some Alberta game designers. It was like a call out for Alberta game designers to meet up, and they're going to hold it in Calgary. And I was like, I must get an invitation to this thing because I've been working on my game for so long, and I'm so frustrated. And because you're designing in a box, right, a complete box. And so I worked my way into that meeting, and it was one of the best weekends of my life. I met so many like really smart, intelligent game designers, and they gave me so much feedback that I'd never received anymore. And I gave them feedback, and by the end of the weekend, we were kind of like, we need to keep this going. We need to create a group from this, like, that persists. And that was turned out to be the Game Artisans of Canada. Um, and yeah, that organization has been fundamental in helping me and its other members sort of navigate the waters of what is, I think, the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, which is design board games.
Right, right.
So yeah, and that's kind of how it started. And then, I I
Well,
came out
let
with
me
a.
interrupt for a quick second.
Oh,
So
sorry.
you mentioned the
I'll
game
just
artists.
drone on forever if you
No, it's
want
a
to
good
interrupt.
story. It's a good story. But I just wanted to mention that I'm glad you brought the game artists up. I'm actually going to be doing a segment on the group later when we post this later this week as an overview on what they're about and you guys are about and Canada and some things like that. So I'm
Yeah.
excited to put that
Cool.
together. So a little more information of that group, but it's super cool. A little different than League of Game Makers, more designer centric and actually a lot bigger and more organized than altogether. Anyway, very cool. Another way we look up
Yeah, we're
to
proud of our bureaucracy.
Yeah, you guys have great bureaucracies up there. And so anyway, so I just wanted to mention that while you're going. But so you've done this, you get this, you find your friends, you get some friends, you get some designer buddies, and you're not so lonely. And then how did that then turn into Roxley?
So I did a lot of board game art. So I'm a graphic designer, and I've done a lot of actual cover art and game art. So I did Eminent Domains art, including the cover art for that. So as an artist, I was kind of getting into the industry through board game art as well, and meeting publishers and stuff like that. So I was doing some art for Tasty Minstrel Games, and I showed Michael Mendez a new prototype that had taken me like 2 years to get to where it was, and that was Jab Real-Time Boxing. Okay. And so I showed him that. He loved that game. Michael Mendez loved that game so much. Him and Seth, who works for TMG as well, played it for I think he said like 5 hours the first day. So it was so he really wanted to publish that game, and I'd always said, well, I want to publish it myself, but I had a child coming on the way and stuff, and eventually I sort of caved and said, okay, let's let TMG publish this game. And so I did all the art for it and helped with the manufacturing process. And then, we released, or TMG released that game, and it was it didn't do super well. Obviously, partly because of the boxing theme, and then obviously also because it's super sonically skill based. And it's so direct conflict and skill based that it just kind of induces panic in most people, which is like an effect that I wanted to achieve with the boxing theme. I wanted you to panic and not know what to do, just like a real fighter would if he was in trouble, right? So to me, from my game design brain, I'm like, oh, this is amazing that people are so terrified of this game, but the result was that people couldn't recommend it to other people, because it was so difficult to get people to try to play with them. So it was actually kind of a failure in the marketplace, even though I'm so proud of that game.
Well, and so is this the moment when you sort of come to realize the difference between a great game design, a great game, and a product and a market?
Yes.
That was the moment where
Absolutely.
you're like, oh, I have to make things people want to play.
Totally. Yeah, and I think everybody has their threshold for challenge, what they will accept for challenge, and that's a lot of the reason why I think a perfect game design is, it feels like you have absolute control of the game, because everybody wants to feel as though they have perfect control over the system, and it's governed by their decisions. But in actuality, it's kind of like a magic trick. You're giving them the illusion of control, and that one didn't have the illusion of control; it just had control. So I don't think it's not really a valid marketable product.
Right. Well, and you sort of you're rolling through a lot of different things, but also like there's this. So wait, you do game design, you're an accomplished artist and brand work, and if I'm not, you also are a programmer, right?
Yes, I'm a developer. That's what my technical schooling background is a computer programmer. So I've done that for years and years. But I always have had, like, I've been doing art since I was 16 years old, doing graphic design for my mom and her friends and stuff like that. So when it came time to go to college, it was still at the time where like the art colleges didn't really have a multimedia program that, that was really solid. So I loved computers, I loved art, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go to computers because art is my passion, and that's, if I want to develop as an artist, I will do that through my passion for art, and just on Friday night I'll be painting something or whatever, right?
Right. Well, and so what's cool about all that is you could be somebody who went off into video games and was doing all the video game stuff, but you've come and you've stayed and you're enjoying we get to have your presence in the board game space. It's great.
Yeah, and I think the like with video games, I think it's become a lot more accessible for small teams. But when I was sort of, I had these like, here's all my dreams of these video games I want to create. It was still at the time where it was like you need this big team to do it, and you have to get into the industry and you have to program, and maybe someday you'll be able to actually design them, but it's not likely, right? Just by virtue of the fact that there's so many people involved, less people get to design video games. At least back then, when it was all C++ and stuff.
Yeah.
Now it's like, with iPhone and like all these SDKs and stuff, and Unity, it's much easier.
Yeah, it is a lot easier. It's still a ton of work.
Totally.
I mean, I've having made a lot of video games myself, I certainly there's a lot I enjoy much more about board games. But to get back to the narrative, right? So you start, you're introduced to gaming, it blows your mind, you're an aspiring designer who's not really making anything fun, and then you find your design group and you start improving, and then you're doing art and games and getting into the scene, learning about the manufacturing process, and you're about to leave, but then you hand it to TMG and get a little bit of a sucker punch with that, and you're like, you know what? I'm doing it, right? Like, so then is that when Roxley began, or what's the next piece there?
Then I would say at that point, I especially, when I started receiving my royalty checks, like it was kind of like my objective was to do this as a career. So I never really wanted to be a publisher. I wanted to be a game designer as a career. So I thought about all of the skills that I had, and now I'd had also experience multiple times working on multiple projects with manufacturers. And I was like, it actually just makes sense if I publish games. I never really wanted to be a publisher. I wanted to always be a game developer. And a lot of the time I describe Roxley as a game development boutique, and I think there's a fundamental difference, because any project that we take on has to have some kind of fundamental, Roxley has to bring something to the table in terms of development, and also obviously branding and stuff. But we want to be involved in actually making this product better somehow. We don't want to just slap our name on products and just release them, and hire an artist. I want to, be very involved in actually making the game system better, kind of thing.
Well, you sort of sound a little like a publisher in that regard. I mean, when it comes to,
it's true,
because I actually, and I don't know if you're transitioning, but I up to now I haven't really thought of Roxley much as a publisher. Brass sort of changed that, right, for me.
Yeah.
But when is it where are those games? Where's Steampunk Rally. What was the one of the name of I have it here somewhere. Oh, Super Motherload. There it is.
Yeah.
Super Motherload. I mean, is that the first one, or was there something before Super Motherload?
That was the first one.
And I know that was based on a game IP, or you used the game IP, but the design and the development and all that was you and your team, right? Or did you?
Yeah, it was me and Matt Tolman. So we started that project together, and then eventually I kind of wrapped up the project. We put a huge amount of work into that game design also. But yeah, that was from the ground up designed by us. I mean, Brass Birmingham, I would say, is, so that Steampunk Rally, we had fundamental, a lot of the drafting system, for example, Oren, always credits me for putting that in. And I mean, it's a fundamental part of the game. So, we are early enough in the process each time for each game that we take on, that we have very fundamental development input into the game. So far, except for I would say the least would be Lancashire, like Brass Lancashire, which obviously is just an existing game that we made a few tiny tweaks to, and then Santorini, in terms of its, like, obviously we completely gutted and redid the theme or non-existent theme in the game, but
that core the abstract game was there.
Yeah, so Santorini was more the designer designed that 30 years ago. So the game was like amazing as it was. So there's not much we could do. There's not much we wanted to do to it, right?
Well, yeah, but I mean, it speaks to, I think, oftentimes game design gets boiled down into perhaps the mechanics, right? But when you think of it as getting back to that product conversation about all of the aspects of a game, the whole product experience, that's the game and the pieces and the finger feel and the colors and how it comes together and the box experience and just all of that. I mean, that's a place where you guys have. That's if you guys have a superpower, it's that holistic, complete product on top of a great game.
Yeah, and I think. Right? Yeah, so I divide it into basically three categories. So there's the art and the branding. Then there's the product design, so how the product is designed, and then there's the game design. And I think that the product design and the game design are fundamentally different things. So like, F.A. Porsche, he would design he designs these cars, but it's like he's designing, it's like you're designing a system, an elegant system for this aesthetic to plug into the actual, so it's the connection between the actual game mechanics and the aesthetics, right? So with Santorini, I was like, it was just kind of on a board, and I was like, no, we need to have something like, I want to have like a cliff coming out of the board, because it's, we have these 3D pieces, but then they're just on this flat board, right? So it's like it was not quite 3D, right? It was like these 3D buildings on this island that was supposed to be coming out of the ocean, right? So I was like, we need it to be more 3D. We needed to, because it wasn't just about adding bling. It just didn't feel complete without it, right? And so I would say that for Lancashire and Santorini, we still really bring the product design to the table.
Yeah, and again, I think it really stands out. I got raked over the coals a little bit for feeling that Santorini was a little hard to put back into the box after you pull it out. But
I don't actually even disagree with you. It is like you have to put it back in a particular fashion. Some of the buildings are like pokey and they can poke the boards, but I mean, ultimately, I felt like it was worth the.
Oh yeah, it's super cool.
The aesthetic that it creates, and so the Spin Master version's out, and we're very happy with the production quality of the Spin Master edition for what people are getting, especially for what people are getting for $30. But one thing that we hear often is like, I miss where can I buy the ocean board? It's like, when I made the decision to allow them, to remove the ocean board, it was kind of like, it was not just them doing it. We have a collaborative process. It was kind of like, I agree that it serves no function. And there's I think the Dice Tower said, I don't like that, there's no purpose to some of this stuff. But as soon as we removed it, then everybody, a lot of people email us saying, I missed that, because it does add.
Yeah.
While it's not just Chrome, because I don't think it's just Chrome if it legitimately adds to the experience.
Right.
I think that's one component that did. So it's kind of like, it's a huge balancing act. And, there's always the possibility of going overboard. But in Santorini's case, I felt that, we didn't go overboard. And I felt that everything we included made the game a better experience, I guess.
Yeah,
not necessarily gameplay.
I just don't think you put it away. If you keep it, on the table, it's fantastic. I want to ask you actually about that game design, product design, art, and branding piece. Before I do, can you tilt your camera back up a little bit? You're starting to
sorry.
clip yourself. Oh, it's fine. Just everyone got such perfect hair. I think it'll be good to. But all right,
It's actually not hair. It's plastic.
oh,
I just
well, that makes
put
it
plastic
easier.
on
Just
my
put
head.
it. Just put it on. It's like Guardians of the Galaxy, right? So that's a conversation I don't hear much when I'm typically talking with board game designers. You see it more with Kickstarter creators and certainly more with publishers. But again, breaking that out, I liked how you did that in terms of the game design, the product design, and the art branding, piece. And so, generally speaking, like just to dial into that a little bit, do you always have an order? Do you do it independently from when you come at it? Or what are, in terms of your approach, generally speaking, how do you stack those? How do you take those three things on?
I would say I would say it like I'm kind of like, I guess if you're talking about like a movie, it's kind of like I would be acting as the director, and so there's the writers and the actors and stuff, and then or a director producer kind of role. Like I'm sourcing the actors and I'm sourcing the director, or the actors and the writers and everybody else. So it's very much so. I would be the central hub responsible for the overall product design, like the producer/producer director is responsible for, the overall management and creation of a movie. So I think that I would classify it like that, and I essentially assign tasks to both sides, and there's lots of interaction between both sides, but usually I'm the central hub talking to both sides of the equation. So and obviously I do the creative direction as well. So I'm very for the Santorini cover, I think we worked on the cover for like 8 months or a year or something, and we scrapped many like sketches and designs, and we went like, there was one where there's a god who's backwards and one was facing you, and there's mist in front, and I kind of want, like, I had a very clear vision of, I want these like I don't want to have stuff. I don't want to ever have stuff that already exists that we're trying to sell. So there's lots of Greek themed games out there.
Sure.
There's zillions of them. So it wasn't good enough for me to just say, okay, let's make a Greek themed game. Right. So I was like, I want to have these, I want to have these gods, but I want to see them in their youthful teenager, childlike form, their adolescent form. And I want them to be like these chibi sort of characters. And, obviously Mr. Cuddington doesn't really do sort of chibi, like they don't really do Japanese anime style art. They're very much closer to like French style / Disney.
But when you marry,
I'm sure they could, because
when you end up having, keep your style but take this influence, you come up with something that looks original, right? Which is what that does.
Yeah, and I think that, so what people have called Santorini's art style is Chisney. So it's like chibi Disney, which I was like, that's great.
No, it's and I actually, you see, I don't know how much you're paying attention, but there's a lot of influence of that game coming through right now in art, in the board game space. So
okay,
I think it's that sort of cute but still illustrated. Because one of the things that's striking about the board game space, at least from my experience, is there is still it's pretty hard to be graphic. It's pretty hard to have really cartoon or heavily graphic art and character and comic type design. If it's not comic book, but it's like cute or bright or defined, it's not that it's not successful and that people don't like it, but it doesn't still have the grab of that illustrated painterly type of style that's more common in the board game space today.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think that there is so much of this beautifully painted art that it becomes a lot of the time samey. So
sure.
you need you need to do something different, right? I think that's the most important thing. So it's like nowadays, I feel like if you look at a 5 minute dungeon, for example,
Sure, it's a good
um,
example.
like very cartoony, but the cartooniness is a very original style,
Yeah,
and it has extremely sort of hipsterish color palette
right,
to it, right?
right.
Like it's very beautiful. I think the sense of color that you see in 5 Minute Dungeon and the palette that they've created, it just pushes that the and also the sort of unique style of how it's illustrated really pushes that the creative direction of that game makes it feel very unique
Yeah, and
and
makes it stand out
desirable.
and feel special, right?
Yeah.
Um, on just to step back for the to your what you're talking about. Essentially, you're talking about being the product lead, right? The person who's in charge of
Yeah.
the creative direction and the team and everything coming together. My impression is you're a little like me in that there's the sort of management organization vision piece, but that you want to make sure you have the right people in those roles to handle those three different things: product design, game design, and art and branding. I find sometimes, for me at least, inspiration can sometimes it comes from a mechanic first, where you're really inspired by some design, and you want to come from it. Or within the case of Herbaceous, it started with the art specifically, and then it actually was filling in the two other areas after the art and brand was sort of driven. And sometimes you start with sort of like, no, I want something that feels and acts like this, and then figure out the game the other way. So I find at least you just need to have a starter inspiration, and then make sure you hit on all those other different aspects. I don't know
Yeah,
if you.
in terms of like gameplay or sorry, mechanics to theme or theme to mechanics, I used to be because I'm where I excel as a game designer is really thinking creatively and sort of flipping a game on its head, like very massive changes to a game. I can do development, but I would say where I can contribute most is like fundamental changes or even like inventing mechanisms kind of thing.
Right.
So my desire is always to create these mechanics and then plug them into, try to find a game to plug them into. But years of sort of agony in that process, I believe it. I believe that it is a much smoother process to establish the theme and the goals, which I believe are really tightly integrated with the idea of the theme. What are we trying to achieve? The goals of the game are, I think it's fundamentally part of the theme, right? So
Right.
starting with the goals and the theme is a much more natural way to design a board game, and it's the least painful, I guess.
Right.
And you end up with a product that is more likely to feel cohesive and without a sort of a pasted on theme. So I think of mechanics kind of like tools,
Sure.
right? Whereas the theme is like the project, right? So if you go out and buy a table saw and you're like, okay, so now I gotta build something with this table saw. So the table saw is like the mechanic. And you're like, what am I gonna build? It's harder to figure out what you need. So it's better to be like, okay, I'm gonna build a garage. That's what I'm gonna build. I'm gonna build a birdhouse. What are the tools that I have in my tool chest? So it's good to always have these tools, which are the mechanics. Good to have them around. Good to have them in your tool chest. But you pull them out, I think, when you find a project that they can well suit to, rather than trying to buy the tools and then build stuff with the
Man,
tools.
last time I tried to make a birdhouse with a buzzsaw, it was a little much. Um, actually, a framework that I know you're a super busy guy, but a framework that you might find interesting that is taken a little bit from the video game space, and I did a video on it. One of my first League of Game Makers videos is this MDA Mechanics Dynamics Aesthetics framework, which is a little bit
Okay,
different
yeah.
than the mechanics theme. And it's typically in games, but it's the idea that you have these mechanics, these fundamental building blocks or tools that then work to create dynamics and dynamic moments. Like in baseball, you have the rules of how baseball is played, but then you have the hit to second base and the second baseman trying to do this moment and stealing the, there's sort of that dynamic moment. And the aesthetic is the type of fun or fulfillment you get out of it, whether it's a narrative or cooperative play or challenge or submission and all these different ways of expressing sort of the aesthetic result of it. And it's just an interesting I think actually I might have used Steampunk Rally in that video. It may be the case because I liked how that game brought out the feel of the theme, right? Like the mechanics resulted in you feeling like you had this contraption that's running down a track, right? Or whatever course. So it's just another way to think about some of those same things that you're saying. The Portal guy, I think, just did an article on that sort of what's the projects, what are the tools conversation as well. So there's a lot of dialogue happening right now, not just in Canada with the game market.
Definitely subscribe to that whole MDA sort of approach to game design. I think I've cited before that Brass is a good example of a game that feels very innovative, but because it doesn't have innovative mechanisms, it doesn't have an innovative necessarily aesthetic, but it has very, very innovative dynamics. So it's taking you get 2 actions per turn, and you have a list of actions and stuff. But when you put these mechanisms that have all been heard of before together, it creates extremely unique and extremely innovative dynamics. Like it is, to me, the game is insanely innovative. Like there's nothing else that feels quite like it. I mean, obviously, you have to take it with a grain of salt because we're publishing the game, but it's always like my review on Board Game Geek is best game ever created, 10 out of 10 from I think it was 8 years ago or something like that. So it's an example of a game that takes very basic, well-known mechanics, nothing innovative, and creates an innovative dynamic.
And that dynamic piece, and again, that's just the word dynamic is not as common in board games, but there's even in Sunset Over Water, which is on Kickstarter, Steve Finn. We were playing around with the design, and it was initiative driven. So you were going to be the player. You're seeing who wakes up first, and the person who wakes up first goes first. So conceptually, really easy for people to understand. Like, oh, I woke up at 5. I go first. Super easy. Yeah. But it felt very like who woke up the earliest was always the advantage. And at some point, we ended up, and I don't remember how what conversation it came out of. Added these other goal cards that are rewarded to the last player who accomplishes something. So it's not always the person who sleeps the latest. Okay. But the latest person always has the opportunity to try to steal it if they want to, it might be like last person to move diagonally or last person to get this type of tile, last person to get this. And just the inclusion of that suddenly changed the whole decision around initiative in a really interesting and dynamic way where you're like, well, I could go first, but maybe that's out there. I think that I might just sleep in. And it really added when you combine 2 things and suddenly there's this new moment in the middle where you're like, I'm thinking about this decision in a way I never really did. That makes it much more interesting and rewarding to me as a player, right?
Yeah, and I think that those moments are what feel most rewarding as a game designer when you create a system and because dynamics I feel are mostly, I don't want to say random, but it's like discovery, right? Yeah. I think that Jonathan Blow in that indie game movie said it perfectly, where we're like, it's like we're coal miners and or miners in a mine, and we're sort of like scrabbling at the dirt, and there's very little chance, but sometimes we can find this bit of gold, and then you keep scraping, and there's more gold, and so when you have that moment where you find that gold, which I would say is like the dynamics, it's just you're trying, that's your objective, to find those dynamics. But when you actually do, there's no feeling like, I don't want to say on earth, but there's no feeling in my professional sort of life
awesome.
that even compares to that. Like
Yeah.
you've discovered something. It really feels like you're an explorer, and you've really discovered something important and something amazing, I
Yeah,
guess.
and it's magic, right? It's at Disney. That's you find that magic of the moment, the golden nugget, that thing
Yeah.
that just brings you back again and again. We've actually been talking for a good amount of time, and my machine starts blowing up at 40 minutes. So I want to switch gears a little bit. I'd be remiss not to talk
Sure.
about Kickstarter because you guys have a good, solid track record on Kickstarter. And rather than like, I don't think I want to go into like tips and tricks because I'm sure you got tons of them. But like when you look at Kickstarter today, and you've been on the platform for at least 2-3 years, what do you think's happening to Kickstarter? How do you see it changing when you're thinking about whatever your next project is? Um, how do you see yourself approaching it? If different, is it the same as it was, or do you see changes? Like what pops out to you when you think about Kickstarter right now?
Um, I feel like there's a lot of rules, I guess, being established on Kickstarter, through like essentially cultural rules where people have, so like every game does stretch goals for over the last 4 years, and these people have, the backers, they've seen that this is constantly occurring the same way, the same structure. It becomes a rule, I guess, sort of for them in their own
Like an
mind, even though
expectation, yeah.
it's, yeah, an expectation that's so, like, such a strong expectation that when that expectation, when a publisher decides to do something differently, it's, perceived as, like they're breaking the rules almost. Like when I was working on Eminent Domain, Eminent Domain, I think when Michael ran that campaign, I think it did like $67,000, and it was like, that was a massive. I think that was the most at that. I don't know, but I think it was the most at that time, or close
That
to
was a big
the most
campaign
that a
back in the
board
day.
game ever did. And during that campaign, we had talked to, I don't know if it was during or after that campaign, we talked to, like, what about the idea of, like, you know, giving everybody, something, if they, so if you bring your friends to the campaign, everybody gets an upgrade. And that was kind of like, and I'm not claiming that we invented the idea of the stretch goal. I think it's a natural progression of the system.
Yeah.
But back then it was just, it was like an idea that we had come across that we had never seen before. Um, but it was like the Wild West back then,
Yeah.
right? And now it's like, it's become so, people have become so conditioned to all of these things, like even stuff like, you must put the player count in the title. We've had people say you must put the player counts and the game time in the title graphic, or
Right.
you're being disingenuous if you don't.
Yeah, yeah.
So, and I'm not saying any of this stuff is wrong. It's just, I think it's natural that this system sort of builds into a
Yeah.
specific
Well,
thing, but it feels less like the Wild West, I would say, and more like a rigid. It feels more and more rigid, I guess, every year in terms of what a creator can acceptably do within the backer culture, I guess.
yeah, I think that's a big part of it. To some degree, the bar keeps going up as well as the competition. So, when everyone is in American Ninja Warrior and they keep taking the slanted wall and they raise it higher and higher, you got to, some trends come out of that, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's a combination of what you're talking about, sort of cultural expectations and and backer experience and audience, and people have been burned, and it's not their first campaign, they've done more and more. But at the same time, you're just seeing more and more marketing and sort of behavioral manipulation stuff coming through, right? Like this is just,
Mhm.
if you look at the mobile scene and in free to play games, that's just been on this, on a manipulate the monkey brain trajectory.
Yeah.
For they've been pushing that forward, and these are all different techniques to draw people in, to engage them, to inspire them, to get other people, and
Yeah.
promote and make the campaign more successful. But also, you're leveraging things when you're saying, hey, if everyone gets together and we do this, we're going to get this. You're trying to drive that behavior, right, to help your campaign. And funding is just, in retail, you're marketing a product on a shelf. This is, you're trying to both market a product and drive some sort of behavior in it as well, right? And it's tough. I think a lot of creators stumble there.
I think that this, in terms of competition, I think this is just the beginning. I think that when you see like companies like Riot Games, that to me is scary. Mechs versus Minions to me is very scary, because you have the company with the highest grossing video game on earth, League of Legends. They're like, we're gonna make a board game, or board games now. So is Blizzard next? And I'm not, like, in these companies, what gives me obviously hope that, is that there is still a very strong scene in the video game industry for indies, right? Especially the top tier indies. Yeah. So I don't think that we're gonna get pushed out, but to me, obviously, it is scary. And I do see, a lot of people have said, well, you're not really competing for dollars, but I do think that there is a finite amount of dollars, not finite, but there is, it's diminishing as there are more good projects on Kickstarter simultaneously.
Oh, it's absolutely the case, man. It's absolutely the case. Everyone's got to compete and stand up for themselves, but there is only so much that people can absorb at any given time.
Totally.
The one thing I would say, well, the competition is coming, and actually, having made video games, once you start making board games, you're like, this is great. You're like, you don't need engineers. But the one thing I'll end with is perhaps the saving grace, the silver lining, is that all of those people are going to find little baby Gavans who have never looked at a board game seriously, and Carcassone's looks like a piece of trash. And they're all going to be playing these games and say, wow, that was like cool. Maybe I should look at this other game. And slowly, I mean, the board game market may be great on Kickstarter and growing, but it is nowhere near the video game market, which is nowhere near the film market and the TV market, right? So there's plenty of space above
absolutely.
to reach out to.
I think overall it's a very exciting time. And I think, the way I conduct myself is basically, the only thing that I really think about with Roxley is I believe that success should be a byproduct of passion. So as long as we are working as hard as we can and making as good of games as we can, then we should be successful. And if I'm not correct about that, I don't care. I'm still going to have that mantra and still continue to just make decisions based on what is best for the game, for forever until I can't, kind of thing. So
I hear you, man. I'm very much on board with that. So thanks for being on. This has been awesome.
Well, thanks for having me.
And thanks for everyone for watching. And I hope it was as interesting for everyone as it was for me. And come subscribe, share, and all that good stuff. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thanks.
Bye.